When I was probably 40, I started painting full-time and was painting in oil. And I love oil. It's beautiful, it's luminous, it's forgiving. I still paint in oil, and I also paint in pastel. But I was teaching at a local art guild, and they asked me for my schedule of classes, and I gave them, I'll teach an oil landscape class, and I'll teach a batik class, and I'll do this. And then I remembered I'd bought all these bottles of dye, and they were for silk painting. And I had bought some fabric, and I thought, oh, this is, you know what? I just have to use this stuff. So I said, and I'll teach a silk painting class. And they said, do you know how to do that? And yeah, I'll be okay by then. It's in a month. And so I messed around with the stuff, and it was instant thrill. It was the very first piece I did, I loved, and it was beautiful, and it made sense. And for me, the learning curve of oil, of painting and slogging along, which I love, but it takes years to feel that you're generating something that's worthy. And in the silk, I felt immediately like these things were beautiful and successful, and people liked them. And so over the years, I've just kind of keep spending more and more time on silk. I still go and paint in oil, but then I come back to silk. So the silk is really interesting because it's a very strong but thin and lightweight material. So it's stretched on a frame, and then I draw on it with a resist material that's kind of almost like a rubber cement consistency, and it penetrates the fabric and creates a barrier to any kind of liquid. So for me, the way I think about it is that watercolor has much the same feel, where it's a white surface generally, and you're putting color down, and it's moving together and blending sometimes. It's always transparent, so colors mix just on a color wheel. You would, if you put red over yellow, you're going to have orange. And the white surface provides that backdrop. And silk is very much the same way. But you have edges with the way I work, which is called the serti technique, which means fence in French, I guess. So it has a fence. So the beautiful colors can move up to the fence, but they stop. So you have the beauty and impulsive behavior of liquid color, but you have some control. So to me, it's the best of both worlds. I don't mix on a palette and put it on the fabric usually. I put the color directly on the fabric and then move it with water and salt and sugar or whatever other additives I'm using. So it has this wonderful, unpredictable behavior on the fabric. So the silk is just a wonderful, flexible surface for that. It's like if you poured red wine on a tablecloth and that's what the dye does. And it's magic when you touch your brush to that fabric and it does that. It's fun for me to watch students for the first time putting the dye down, and they just, oh my God, and they're all standing around, how did you do that? What did you do right there? How did that happen? So it's really fun. Almost any natural fabric can be dyed, but there's such a variation in the types of dyes and ways to fix colors depending on the fabric. And I've done some tie-dyeing, some batik using Procyon dyes and wax. And in fact, I use some wax techniques with silk. You can use soy wax as a batik technique. But I tend to trust my palette and my colors and my surface and my supplies. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want to be starting an important piece with a new material. I want to know what it's going to do. And I want to know when I reach for my colors where this color is, where that color is. So I don't experiment too much with other dyes and materials on a given series. My students and I do get together and do experimental days where we just mess around with stuff. But then sometimes you have the heartbreak of putting it in the dye bath thing and it's all gone. and then that's not fun. So the meditative part is drawing and painting. It's all very Zen. Then the setting of the colors, which is just dunking it in a bath in a dish pan full of chemical solution, which is not particularly harsh. It sounds terrible, but it's just a chemical solution in water. It takes about a minute to set the colors. Then I take it out, rinse it in some fabric detergent, and I lay it over a towel. It dries in about 2 minutes, and then it's just a beautiful piece of thin, gorgeous silk that you could wear or whatever. But what I do then is I take a prepared canvas with gallery wrapped edges. I paint the edges in advance, a dark color, usually black or black navy. So what I have is a dark edged canvas with a white top. I use a matte medium, an acrylic matte medium as a glue. It makes a fine collage glue. People don't always know that. And I have to have with me my silk, a spray bottle of water, my matte medium, brushes, rags, because this happens very fast. I brush the matte medium on the surface. I spray the fabric with water so it has some heft to it. I lay it down on the surface, and it's all glommed up, and I begin to smooth it very quickly and pull it to make it tight, both sides, and I have about a minute and a half to do that before it starts to dry. And when it's completely smooth, I babysit it for about 30 minutes to make sure any bubbles, if I can get to the bubbles and smooth them out. And then I let it dry overnight. So now it's a piece of thin fabric glued onto this canvas with the edges sticking out. So then I put a new blade in the X-Acto knife, trim it out, and then touch up any little boo-boos. And then I varnish, at least 2 layers of varnish. So it's, the last little bit is more intense. It's not as much fun, but that's how they get to be paintings on the wall instead of just beautiful fabric. And for me, the composition is really the most important thing. If the composition is correct, I think the painting can be successful. It doesn't necessarily end up successfully, but if the composition is not correct and exciting, it doesn't matter how beautiful it is, it's not going to be successful. So I look for composition. I am an absorber of place. I sit and I look and I breathe and I try to soak up the feeling of it. My husband's great about, if we're in a beautiful place, I'll say, please get me photos of rocks or sky or those clouds. Can you get me those clouds? And he will take pictures for me. So I have that beautiful reference. I've never been a great drawer. I'm not a renderer. I respect that and I appreciate it, but I'm not that girl. I'm a colorist. So for me, I just want enough structure to get to the color. I want to have enough going on that I can get out those colors. And it's funny how a series evolves. Like I noticed when I walked around the show, I can see the order that I painted them in. The first ones were much more subtle. And then part of it is my addiction to color. I fall in love with colors, and I just, I'm gonna have a party with royal blue and apricot, and then it becomes just more and more intense. And that's kind of where I'm going. I'm just enjoying the intensity of the color and the contrasts and the boldness of it. So for me, like there are a few that came out really easily. Like the petroglyph ones came out really easily for me. The Born to This Land one is actually an image I've painted before in oil and pastel. And I decided I would do it in silk, and it just was there. Easily, I think it's beautiful. The fish head rocks were really fun to do. It was so fun. I had students in and out, and my husband and I were like, what? He was like, what is that? What is that? And I was like, do you remember when we drove through to get to Death Valley? You remember that thing? And he was like, oh, right. So there's actually a lot of silk painters all over the world. There's a Silk Painters International group. When I learned to silk paint my first paintings were in about 95, and I painted on my own with no real, I still never have taken a class. It wasn't until probably 2 years ago that I joined the Silk Painters International group and realized all the stuff people were doing all over the world in silk. In a way, I think I missed out on some possibilities of what can be done with it, but on the other hand, I developed my own approach and look, and I'm just enjoying kind of getting to know some of those folks, and I teach a lot, and now I've gotten my whole group of students to join the local chapter, and we try to go and participate. Most of the silk painters worldwide seem to be working on more just on the loose fabric, doing wearables or doing scarves or wall hangings or flags. I don't know that that's true, but that's what it feels like to me. And then fewer of us are mounting wall art. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on for sure in silk. You can thicken it with, there's thickeners like sodium alginate that you can stamp with a thickened dye on silk. There's metallic resists. There's all kinds of wonderful things. Sugar is an interesting thing. And I don't think you could use sugar on watercolor because it would permeate the paper. But on silk, you can, say you have a large, broad area of sky. If you were to put salt on it, salt drives the dye away and leaves like a little spot where the salt crystal was, but it leaves a bloom outside of it of lighter. The sugar does the opposite. The sugar dissolves into the silk and makes wonderful swirly patterns, like on that big one, the sky, and that big one is done with sugar. So it's a much softer look, but again, it's a pattern and a texture you could not paint on. You couldn't make that happen. But that product will do its own thing, and you just have to stay out of the way and let it do it. But yes, alcohol, water, drops of certain dyes. The yellow dyes drive other colors away. So, if you have a pool of green and you put yellow in, it'll create blooms of yellow, which are very cool. But every dye behaves a little differently, and you just learn your palette. And that's one reason I stick with certain brand and a certain color palette. I know what it'll do. Yeah. For me, the silk is immediate and exciting, and I'm not a patient person. I can plug away at something until it's correct, but that's not as much fun for me as doing something that just happens instantaneously. And so for me, the silk gives me the ability to play more and to be braver, because I don't feel the same anxiety like I'm going to put this down and it's permanent, and if I put too many layers down, I'm going to have a big old glob of paint. But with the silk, if I don't like it, I can just dunk it. Before those colors are set, it's all ephemeral. So I can just mess around with it, wash out certain areas, dunk it in the bathtub. It doesn't matter until it's the way I want it. So it's very forgiving in that way. It's perfect for someone with a short attention span like me.